Hello. So our third and final video for Friday this week is talking about closer to home in eastern Kentucky, how there used to be coal mining. There's still some coal mining, of course, but a lot of the coal mines have shut down in the last 20 years. Um, and one thing that they have done to try to replace that economic activity is actually reintroduce elk to the area. So where there might have been a little bit too much rock and dense forest for the elk to be really happy before, where they've reclaimed mines, there's actually a mix of forest and rock and grassy plateaus and slopes. So now it's actually pretty good elk habitat. And seeing the coal mines shutting down and a lot of those jobs leaving, they needed something. And elk is not going to replace coal. Instead of hundreds of millions of dollars, we're talking about a few $1,000,000. Not nearly as many jobs, not nearly as big an industry. So the region is still hurting. There's no doubt about that. But this is one thing that they're trying to do to help. And so they brought in elk from the Rocky Mountains, and now there are several thousand. The state issues permits for about 500 every year for people to hunt, and it's a stable, if not growing, population. So as far as elk dynamics go, we're looking at a sustainable situation in eastern Kentucky. Um, from an economics perspective, this I think is a really fascinating sort of story to tell. So the Pebble Mine was a trade-off, one natural resource against another. This is not a trade-off in the same way. Here, there's a vacuum created by one natural resource losing its economic viability, at least in a lot of traditional forms. So the decline of coal is hugely important for the region. Why has it happened? Well, a big reason is because we've shifted toward other fuels that burn cleaner. Um, Cleaner burning fuels are good if you're generating electricity. I mean, your equipment doesn't have to be as specialized to deal with all of the. I mean, coal is pretty dirty stuff. Um, if you've ever used coal to heat a house, shoveling that stuff, you get covered in soot, and I can only imagine what the mines are like, or working in a power plant that handles coal, or the trains that transport it. Something like natural gas burns a lot cleaner. It's also you can have much smaller turbines, so you don't need to have huge power plants. You can have more smaller power plants and have it happen closer to where people live. It doesn't have nearly as much of the thick black smoke you see come out, and you can also fire up a gas turbine almost in real time, where something like a coal furnace, you need to be building it up slowly over time. So if electricity demand changes, you can adjust it much quicker with natural gas. We've gotten a lot more natural gas because of the fracking movement, so it's become a lot cheaper, and that is one of the main reasons it has replaced coal as one of our primary energy inputs. We still use a pretty good amount of it, something like 30%, I think, for the Tennessee Valley Authority. Their generation portfolio is coming from coal, but it used to be 70%, so it's gone way down. And they actually bring in a fair amount of coal from the western U.S., from the Powder River Basin, Wyoming, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana. It's a much lower sulfur coal from out west. And so when it comes to sulfur dioxide and other things that get released in the air, They've switched a fair amount of coal burning. They often mix some of the more local coal with some of the stuff that they bring in. But so all of these are reasons why it's become harder and harder to mine coal profitably in eastern Kentucky or Appalachia in general. Pair that with lawsuits about black lung and environmental cases about what happens when the coal gets burned and contributing to climate change, as well as particulate matter and other pollutants. There are a lot of reasons why coal has become less and less important for generating electricity that we use. But again, that has had profound impacts on the economy of a place like eastern Kentucky. And so here we have an example of another natural resource, this time a renewable resource, wildlife, being used to try to fill some of that vacuum left in the economy when a big industry scales way back. I find it fascinating that it just so happens that you can use reclaimed coal mines as pretty good elk habitat after mountaintop removal and such. So this is something that's a little bit harder to think about a cost-benefit analysis. I mean, you can certainly do that. For something like reintroducing elk, you think about the benefits that you'll get in terms of jobs, people enjoyment out of hunting, people enjoyment out of just viewing wildlife, coming to see it. You even get benefit of people just knowing that there are elk in eastern Kentucky. Even if they don't drive out there and see them, that's something people still care about. So that's something we care about. What are the costs for something like this? Well, of course, it costs money to run a big program transporting these big animals halfway across the country. But yeah, I mean, something like this, the cost-benefit analysis is probably overwhelmingly positive, because on the benefit side, you also have this element of breathing new life into this area that has a lot of poverty. And this ties into when I showed you the EJ Screen tool, the Environmental Justice Screening tool on the EPA's website. It's a good reminder, that's a good data source, but also a good reminder about how natural resources don't exist in a vacuum. Pollution doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's really about how those things interact with people for us in this class. And so something like looking at the local poverty rate, the local unemployment rate, those may be really big factors in deciding whether it makes sense to run a program to bring a bunch of elk and reintroduce them or not. And in this case, it seems like a pretty clear winner to me. So I thought that was a cool article. I hope you enjoyed it as well. I hope you have a great weekend. Next week, we will get into more of the meat and potatoes. We'll start talking more about the economic tools that actually let us quantify stuff in environmental economics. Bye. Stay healthy.